Good morning, welcome back to the channel. I'm off to look for some fungi to photograph in a minute. I'm at my local woodland and it's that time of the year. But before that, there's a video I've been wanting to make for quite a while actually, and it's all about how to get great quality images at high ISOs. Now, being wildlife photographers, we're often shooting early morning, late afternoon, evening when the light levels are low, and in order to get a fast shutter speed to freeze the motion of our animal and to avoid camera shake, we're inevitably going to shoot at high ISO numbers. So how do we get great quality images shooting at high ISOs? And there are certain things you can do to increase the quality, and we're going to cover all of those things in this video. And if you stick towards the end of the video, there's a really good tip that really will improve your high ISO performance for any camera, to be honest. So I'm going to jump in the van, put the kettle on, and we'll talk about all the things we can do to get great quality images with high ISO numbers. Incidentally, anyone that's been watching my channel for a while, you might notice that I've got a new pair of sunglasses. They're prescription sunglasses. And the only reason I mention that is this is the first pair of variable focus glasses that I've ever had. So I'm not sure how I'm going to get on with them. So I don't know if you guys, if you're glasses wearers, if you wear your glasses when you're taking photographs or you don't, let me know in the comments section below. It'd be interesting to find out. I've always wore glasses, either sunglasses or ordinary glasses, from the very beginning of when I've been a photographer, so it's sort of comfortable for me. But anyway, no more talking about glasses. Let's get in the van and we'll talk about how to create great quality images at high ISO numbers. Okay, so I'm in the van, cup of tea on the go, and it's time to talk about high ISO performance. Now, the reason we end up using high ISOs, as I've already mentioned, is because we're shooting early morning, often late afternoon, evening when the light levels are low, and we have to freeze the motion of our animal. Now, there's only two ways to get more light into the camera, and that's either to use a wider aperture, so in other words, let more light in through the lens. But if we're shooting early morning, late evening, we've probably already done that. The aperture's probably already wide open, so we can't get any more light in through the lens. We could set a slower shutter speed, but all that will do is result in a blurred picture because we've got a subject that's moving. So we can't lengthen the shutter speed to increase the light coming into the camera. So the only thing that's left is to increase the ISO number. And what that does is it increases the sensor's sensitivity to light. So in other words, it makes the digital sensor in the camera more sensitive to light. So it needs less light to make the same exposure. So if we increase the ISO number, we are letting more light. We're making the sensor more sensitive to light, so the picture gets brighter. And that's even if we leave the shutter speed and the aperture exactly the same. So they're the three ways. You've got aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Aperture, the amount of light coming into the camera through the lens. Shutter speed, the amount of time the shutter is open. And the ISO, how sensitive to light the sensor is. And the higher the ISO number, the more sensitive to light that camera's sensor is. The problem is, if we shoot at very high ISO numbers, we're going to start to introduce digital noise, and that can be a real problem. It reduces the sharpness of the picture, it reduces the quality of the picture, and also it reduces the dynamic range of the image. So in other words, you get less detail in the bright areas and the dark areas of the shot. There's not such a big range of exposure that can be captured by the digital sensor. So for lots of reasons, shooting at high ISOs isn't actually ideal, but as wildlife photographers, sometimes it's absolutely essential. The first question we should be asking ourselves is, are we worried about shooting at high ISO numbers for wildlife photography? And the question, or the answer should be, absolutely not. Because the fact of the matter is, shutter speed is king. We need a fast enough shutter speed to freeze the motion of the animal and avoid camera shake. We've already talked about that. And if that results in a high ISO number and more digital noise, then that's a price we have to pay. I'm always going to take a sharp picture with noise over a less noisy picture that's blurred, because once that picture is blurred because of subject movement or camera shake, there's not a lot we can do about that. We can, however, take some of the noise out post-production. So I'm always going to pick the noise. Okay, so shutter speed is king. Remember that, always, always, always. Now, when it comes to noise reduction, post-production software, there's lots on the market. Photoshop will do noise reduction now. I use Topaz and they are really, really good. So I absolutely haven't got a problem with images that have got a lot of noise. We can get rid of a lot of it post-production, and you can balance the amount of noise that you'll be taking out of that image against the amount of detail you preserve. So in other words, in the old days, If you did a lot of noise reduction, it resulted in softening the whole picture. But these days, it's A, way better, and B, you can balance the amount of noise reduction against the amount of sharpness you want to retain in the picture. So firstly, absolutely not a problem. We can get rid of a lot of the noise post-production. But, and here's the most important thing, there are things we can do that reduce the amount of noise at high ISO while we're actually taking the pictures, and that's what we're coming on to next. The most important thing we can do when it comes to shooting at high ISO numbers is to get the exposure right. Now, if you look at this picture coming up, this is a picture of a red deer taken at Richmond Park in London, and it's shot at ISO 3200. Now, it is a RAW file, but this is straight out of the camera, no editing whatsoever. And if you look, the picture's quite dark. And the reason it's dark is because it's underexposed. The ISO is not high enough. Now, I'm going to zoom into this. I'll show you a crop, and you can see it is really noisy at 3200, which is not a massively high ISO number. It is high, but not hugely high. And the reason it's very, very noisy is because the picture is underexposed. Now, if you look at the next shot, this was taken at 10,000 ISO, so a much higher ISO number, but there's less digital noise. And again, if we look at the zoomed in shot, you can see clearly it's a much better quality image. And again, this was a raw shot taken out of the camera, no editing whatsoever. So the fact of the matter is, by getting the exposure correct, we can reduce the amount of noise in camera, and that's a massive. And so many people underexpose the picture in order to reduce the ISO number because they think they're going to reduce their digital noise, when all you're doing, if you do that, is increasing the noise. So get the exposure right. Now, if you look at the histograms for these two shots, on the first one, the histogram is too far to the left-hand side, showing that the picture is underexposed. Whereas if you look at the right one, it's pushed to the right-hand side, and that's creating the right exposure and therefore reducing noise, even though the ISO is much higher. So you push the histogram to the right-hand side without it coming off the edge of the graph, so no overexposure, but we get the exposure right. It's called ETTR, exposed to the right. And that's the best way that you can reduce noise shooting at high ISOs. So don't, whatever you do, underexpose the image and try and reduce the ISO. Expose it correctly, expose to the right, and your pictures will have way less noise, even at very, very high ISO numbers. And as I say, 10,000 ISO as opposed to 3,200 ISO. So the 10,000 ISO, much higher, much better in terms of noise control. There are a couple of other things we need to think about when it comes to shooting with high ISOs for wildlife photography. Now, one of them is maybe convert the picture to black and white. So let's say you haven't got any noise reduction software, you've got a noisy picture and you want to do something with it. Now, there's two types of noise. We've got colour noise and luminance noise. Now, colour noise it creates little speckly coloured dots throughout the picture, and it doesn't look very nice at all. And then the luminance noise is just like a graininess throughout the picture. So, in the old days of film, when we were shooting with high ISOs, the grain could actually be quite nice, and it became part of the picture. You know, it's quite an artistic sort of feel to the shot, whereas digital noise is not quite so nice. So if we convert the picture to black and white, we take all those coloured dots away, and they just become like, you know, little grey dots, and it like a film grain effect almost. So that's one way you can save a picture. So if you've got an image you've shot at high ISO, it's really noisy, and you still want to use it, maybe shooting at high, converting it to black and white is a great idea. And then the other thing I do need to mention is kit. If you shoot with a wide aperture lens, that lets more light into the lens, so that reduces your ISO. So let's say we've got an f4 lens, that will let more light in than an f6.3 lens. So on the f4 lens, the ISO will be lower, therefore we'll have less digital noise. And the fact of the matter is, there's no way around it. The lower the ISO number, the less noise you've got. So you always shoot with the lowest ISO number that the lighting conditions will allow, because that will still give you your best quality image. And last but not least is sensor size. Now, that does have an effect on the amount of noise. Full frame sensors generally have less noise than APS-C sensors and Micro Four Thirds. And the reason for that is the sensor's bigger, the pixels are bigger, and they're more spread out, so they gather more light. So it gives you a less noisy image. Obviously, APS-C sensors are not as good as full frame sensors, and then Micro Four Thirds are smaller still. They're about half the size of a full frame sensor, so the pixels are smaller and the noise control won't be as good. Now, they're still great cameras, you know, they're small, they're light, they're good quality, But the fact of the matter is you get more noise with a 4/3 sensor than you will get with a full frame sensor, and you get more noise with an APS-C sensor than you will with a full frame sensor. So it's just something to bear in mind. Kit, is important. So a wide aperture lens will reduce the ISO, which means you get less digital noise in the first place. And if you shoot with a full frame sensor, that will give you less digital noise than an APS-C sensor or 4/3 sensor. Now, it's just something to bear in mind if you haven't bought all your kit yet, or you're thinking about upgrading or changing. It's just one of those considerations. Obviously, there are pluses and minuses. The smaller sensors generally have smaller lenses, smaller cameras. They're more easy to carry around. They're generally a bit cheaper. Full frame are bigger, heavier, and a bit more expensive. So it's the choice you make, isn't it? I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful. And if you have, if you can give it a thumbs up, that would really help my channel. Apparently it helps the YouTube algorithms, and I want to grow the channel. So if you could do that, that would be brilliant. And if you haven't already subscribed and you found this useful, please think about subscribing. Again, I'm building the channel up, albeit slowly, and the more the merrier. I do lots of different types of videos, so tutorials like this, out in the field, behind the scenes, photographing wildlife, a few kit reviews, stuff that I buy myself. So there's quite a bit of variety. I've got a big back catalogue of videos as well. So yeah, if you've enjoyed this video and you haven't subscribed, if you could think about subscribing, that would be great. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll speak to you on the next one. So bye for now.